Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday the 21st of October here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Israel's next steps. Netanyahu hones his plan to strike Iran as Israel targets Hezbollah's economic strongholds in Lebanon.
As China's banks cut their lending rates to boost the economy, Muddy Waters founder Carson Block says he sees no sense in putting money into the country.
Plus, the big green short, why more hedge funds are betting against the green transition than on it.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has held a series of meetings planning the next attack on Iran after a Hezbollah drone exploded next to his private home. The drone was part of a large missile launch from Lebanon that came 2 days after Israel announced the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Iran has denied its involvement in the Hezbollah drone attack, but in an interview with Turkish broadcaster NTV, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned against any strike.
Any attack on Iran is our red line and we do not tolerate it. An attack on our nuclear facilities, any attack that takes place against us, will be faced with a similar attack from our side. Our reaction will be similar to the attack that is done against us.
In the interview, Araghchi said there was a high probability the war in Gaza and Lebanon spreads to the wider Middle East. Israel's killing of Sinwar, the Hamas leader, was viewed by many as a potential turning point, but in the days since, combat has intensified with Hezbollah and Hamas.
Now, China has cut its benchmark lending rates as part of a series of measures aimed at reviving growth and halting housing market declines. The one-year loan prime rate was lowered 25 basis points to 3.1%, more than any economist survey by Bloomberg had predicted. Despite the shift, Muddy Waters founder Carson Block says he's still not bullish on China.
China wants foreign capital right now, but the moment that she feels that doesn't need it or that the costs of it outweigh the benefits, foreigners are going to be horribly abused again. This movie plays repeatedly.
Carson's comments come as other investors are making a beeline for Chinese stocks as the economic outlook improves. The central bank has signalled more easing is on the cards.
Taiwan's leader says the island is looking towards nuclear power to fuel its chip dominance. Public support for using reactors in Taiwan plunged in 2011 when Japan was struck by an earthquake that wrecked the Fukushima plant. But in an exclusive interview with Bloomberg, Premier Zhu Rongtai says he thinks it would solve the issue of surging demand for electricity from chip makers amid the AI boom.
We know that many other countries are actively developing various forms of nuclear energy. The US is also developing new nuclear technologies by 2030. We hope that Taiwan can also catch up with this global trend and the new nuclear technologies.
Taiwan's leader Zhu Rongtai there speaking through a translator. Taiwan's efforts to bolster its energy security come after its government announced plans in August to lift defence spending to a record in 2025, the 8th straight year of increases.
New Bloomberg analysis of hedge fund data shows the fast money on Wall Street is betting against clean energy and green technology. Despite vast green stimulus packages in the US, Europe and China, more hedge funds are on average net short on batteries, solar power, electric vehicles and hydrogen. And more funds are net long fossil fuels. That's according to analysis of positions voluntarily disclosed by roughly 500 hedge funds to the data compiler Hazeltree. The climate short may prove more damaging than the political pushback over so-called woke capitalism.
In the United States, Kamala Harris has criticised Donald Trump's use of swear words and vulgar language, saying profanity will put voters off. Speaking during an interview with Al Sharpton on MSNBC, she said former President Trump needs to practice decorum. Harris also made reference to Trump's addresses whilst campaigning in Atlanta before the sit-down.
When he does answer a question or speak at a rally, have you noticed he tends to go off script and ramble? And generally, for the life of him, cannot finish a thought.
Vice President Kamala Harris speaking there. House Speaker Mike Johnson dismissed Trump's remarks as some fun language that shouldn't distract voters from his policy positions.
Here in the UK, the NHS could be set for an increase in funding. That's as the Chancellor finalises plans ahead of the upcoming budget. Bloomberg's Tira Adebayo reports now.
Billions of pounds are expected to be set aside for healthcare in next week's budget. The cash injection comes as the NHS embarks on extensive reforms, according to anonymous government sources. Today, Health Minister Wes Streeting is set to call for ideas from the public for what he's calling the biggest national conversation about the institution since its founding in 1948. In its manifesto, Labour pledged to create 40,000 extra NHS appointments and operations a week. In a statement, Streeting confirmed he has reached an agreement on healthcare funding with the Chancellor. Meanwhile, property website Rightmove says buyer nerves ahead of the budget announcement are dampening the usual seasonal bounce in house prices. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
In a moment, we're going to bring you the latest on developments in the Middle East, plus our reporting on how hedge funds are piling up bets against the green transition. But another story caught our eye this morning too, which is our opinion columnist, Howard Chua-Yuan, talking about tea, specifically high tea.
Now, as one of the Americans in London, although he has, as he said, passed his life on the UK test, which is where this question came up about
Right.
exactly what high tea is. And I didn't know this. I would have thought, as Howard did as well, that it was afternoon tea, but it's not. So,
It's
go
the
on.
equivalent of supper, basically.
Yeah.
You sit at the table for high tea. So, yeah, it's considered like a dinner time thing. It's a bigger meal than afternoon tea.
Yes, indeed. Howard essentially wants these these distinctions scrapped, and essentially he said he should roll them into one, but also making a broader argument for how, in fact, the afternoon tea, which is something, the preserve of luxury hotels often here in London, could be reformed, making it more perhaps about the tea, bringing in...
Yeah, no, I get what he's pointing at. I don't think that anybody in the UK really makes a distinction between high tea and afternoon tea anymore. But I do get what he's pointing at, which is that afternoon tea has become very expensive, and generally, get a soggy sandwich and a really hard scone. And actually, it should be much more about maybe the tea specialist teas. Maybe then you could be supporting tea growers, for example, and just make it a kind of more special, less overly expensive pastime.
Indeed. More on that at bloomberg.com/opinion to read Howard Chua-Yuan's piece on high tea. Now to the Middle East. Israel's Prime Minister held a series of meetings with his top security advisors to discuss their next move on Iran. This after a Hezbollah drone on Saturday targeted Benjamin Netanyahu's home. Our EMEA News Director Roslyn Matheson joins us now for more on this. Good morning, Ros. Does it look like Israel is close to attacking Iran? What might we expect?
Well, it does sound like it. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met last night with some of his top security aides. They discussed a number of things, but among them was this plan to respond to Iran for its ballistic missile strike on Israel. So we're in that tit-for-tat environment between them of direct action. And Netanyahu has made clear he does plan to strike back. The question obviously is when and how. We know there are reports of leaks of some of the planning and training that's been going on. No doubt the actual involves striking specific targets in Iran, most likely on the military side. It does seem as though oil, particularly nuclear sites, may be off the table. The US knows what those plans are. It's been leaning on Israel to not hit oil installations or nuclear sites. But Israel's clearly getting to the point it needs to do something. It's been some weeks now since the ballistic missile strike. What that shows us is that it is actually taking some cues from the US, still deliberating and trying to think of a response that will send a message without triggering a full-blown war.
So, of course, we're waiting to see how Israel chooses to move in that direction. But we did have further strikes on Hezbollah targets over the weekend, notably in Lebanon, hitting a financial institution that the group uses. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, that's right. We know that they're now also targeting Hezbollah's economic strongholds, its financial network. These are sort of shadow institutions used by the group and its leadership, particularly associated with the Al-Qad Al-Hassan Association, which is sort of this alternative banking structure. It operates outside the law and allows them to pass money around. So obviously not just targeting the military leadership here, not just targeting their weapons, caches and so on, but also targeting their economic and financial structure. The whole point of that is to really, again, weaken Hezbollah as well, to the point that they say that they don't want Hezbollah being a force on its borders. So they're coming at Hezbollah in all those different ways.
How significant was the drone attack, though, on Netanyahu's home, the explosion? It penetrated Israeli defences.
Well, there's been a number of drone strikes recently that have penetrated the Israeli defences, so it's not the first one. But obviously, Israel is calling this a red line. Well, at least the foreign minister did. This was his private coastal residence, which is north of Tel Aviv, and he was not there. His family was not there. No one was injured. So you really can't call this some sort of assassination attempt, given all those parameters. And they would have likely known that, Hezbollah. But obviously, they were trying to send a message, and it sort of increases the temperature even further because it was seen as something very personal, even if they didn't intend to strike him directly because they knew he was not there at the time. It does send that message, and obviously Israel now is responding by saying it's a red line.
OK, Ros, thank you very much for joining us with the latest this morning. That's our EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson.
Now, more on this story. Hedge funds have examined key sectors in the green economy and decided to bet against clean energy and green tech. In a special report, Bloomberg examines the climate short that could be even more damaging than the political pushback that has been seen against so-called woke capitalism. Joining us now for more on this is Bloomberg's ESG managing editor in EMEA, Tasneem Broja. Tasneem, good morning. Thanks for your time. What are these hedge funds betting against exactly? What do we know?
Yeah, good morning. So what this story shows us is that despite all the stimulus, so we've had 2 years of the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and even longer than that with the enormous regulatory and legislative apparatus supporting the green transition in the EU, hedge funds as a group appear to be largely betting against key green sectors. So specifically, our analysis found that more hedge funds are net short solar stocks than are net long, and the same negative view applies to electric vehicles, to batteries, and to hydrogen. They're more negative now than they were in 2021. And at the same time, more hedge funds are net long oil, net long gas, and even coal than are short those sectors.
And do we know why hedge funds have shifted their positions?
Yeah, I mean, the context is interesting here. So at the beginning of this year, there were forecasts that with interest rates coming down, the green sector would bounce back after sort of struggling in the post-pandemic era of higher rates and an energy crisis. And a few pockets are doing better, like wind, for example, and hedge funds have noted that and are a more positive wind. For now, though, what we kept hearing from the hedge fund managers we interviewed was that it's all about geopolitics. Geopolitics is very much getting in the way of that expected recovery in the green transition. So tariff wars appear to be getting increasingly entrenched, with the US and Europe imposing tariffs on China and China then retaliating. We had one hedge fund manager tell us explicitly that geopolitics is, as he put it, I'm just reading here, the key reason why the energy transition theme isn't working out, he said. And then there was another who pointed to the dominance of China across green sectors, I mean, notably solar, which has made it particularly hard for companies in the US and Europe to compete. And so his advice is that wherever China dominates, as he puts it, just run for the hills as an investor in the green transition.
That is interesting. Now, we've used the word and we've written it in the piece also, the idea of this being worse than the pushback against, quote, woke capitalism. Just talk to us a bit about that, i.e. the consequences maybe of these people and hedge funds making these decisions.
So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting sort of way to set it up. Woke capitalism is very much a US movement, specifically the Republican Party, which the Green movement has sort of largely characterized as, illogical and sort of ignoring the facts. The reason we thought it was interesting to look specifically at hedge fund managers in the context of the green transition is because these guys have no ideology, not one way or the other. All they're looking for is where to make a profit. And from that sort of laser focus on making money and from that sort of, dispassionate approach to that goal, they've decided that here and now, the green transition largely is not a winning bet. That said, there is one sector in particular that they do like, and that is grids and grid infrastructure. And that is notably also a sector that is shielded from the kind of geopolitical sort of tit for tat that is particularly damaging for solar and wind and other green sectors.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.